There's a specific kind of pain that hits different from everything else. When someone who used to be a constant presence in your life just stops reaching out. No dramatic fight, no big goodbye, just silence that stretches from days into weeks into months. And here's what nobody tells you about that silence. It's screaming three brutal truths that you need to hear right now, because the story you're telling yourself about why they're not calling is probably wrong. According to research published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships, when people deliberately reduce contact with someone, it activates the same neural pathways in your brain as physical pain, which is why this hurts so much. But the reason behind their silence reveals something critical about human psychology that changes everything you thought you knew about relationships. And I'm going to break down exactly what's happening in their mind, what it says about you, and why understanding these three truths will save you from months of unnecessary suffering. Let's start with the first truth. And this one's gonna sting because it shatters the most comforting lie we tell ourselves. When someone doesn't call or message you for a long time, the first thing it means is that you are simply not a priority in their current life chapter. Notice I didn't say you're not important, I said you're not a priority, and there's a massive difference. Human beings operate on a hierarchy of attention and energy. Every single day, we make unconscious decisions about where to invest our limited resources of time, emotional bandwidth, and mental focus. Your job, your family, your romantic partner, your health crisis, your new obsession, these things naturally absorb the majority of your available attention. And here's the uncomfortable reality: if someone wanted to reach out to you, they would. It takes 30 seconds to send a text message. It takes 2 minutes to make a phone call. The "I've been so busy" excuse is exactly that, an excuse. Because we're never too busy for what truly matters to us. We make time for our priorities, and we find excuses for everything else. Now, before you spiral into thinking this means you're worthless to them, let me explain the psychology behind priority shifting. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who revolutionized our understanding of human personality, talked about how people move through different psychological seasons in their lives. Sometimes you're in a season of expansion, where you're reaching outward, building new connections, exploring new territories. Other times you're in a season of contraction, where you're pulling inward, focusing on healing, processing, or intensive work on specific areas of your life. When someone stops reaching out, it usually means they've entered a contractive phase, where their priority list has narrowed dramatically, and you fell outside that inner circle. It doesn't mean they hate you. It doesn't mean the relationship was fake. It just means that right now, in this specific chapter of their life, maintaining contact with you isn't serving their immediate needs or goals. And that's a statement about their current psychological state, not your inherent value as a human being. But here's where most people get it wrong. They assume that if they just reach out more, remind the person of their existence, prove their worth through constant effort, the other person will suddenly remember how great they are and start calling again. That's not how human psychology works. When you chase someone who's pulled away, you're actually confirming their decision to deprioritize you. You're showing them that you need them more than they need you, which creates an unbalanced dynamic that pushes them even further away. The harsh truth is that relationships require mutual investment. If you're the only one reaching out, initiating plans, checking in, and keeping the connection alive, then you're not in a relationship, you're in a one-person show where you're both the actor and the audience. Now let's move to the second truth, and this one requires you to look in the mirror, because it's about what their silence reveals about the foundation of your relationship. When someone doesn't call or message you for a long time, the second thing it means is that your relationship was probably more situational than substantial. This is the hardest pill to swallow, because it means that what you thought was a deep, meaningful connection was actually built on convenience, proximity, or shared circumstances rather than genuine compatibility and mutual choice. Think about the relationships in your life that have truly lasted. The friendships that survive distance, time zones, life changes, and years of minimal contact. What makes those relationships different? They're built on something deeper than just enjoying each other's company when it's easy. They're built on shared values, genuine understanding, emotional resonance, and a mutual commitment to maintaining the bond regardless of external circumstances. Situational relationships are the college roommates who were inseparable for 4 years and then never spoke again after graduation. They're the coworkers who grabbed lunch every day and then ghosted each other after one person switched jobs. They're the friends you made through a romantic partner who disappeared the moment that relationship ended. These connections felt real in the moment because proximity creates false intimacy. When you see someone every day, share experiences, laugh together, and navigate challenges side by side, your brain interprets that as deep friendship. But what you're actually experiencing is situational bonding. You're connected to the situation, not necessarily to each other as individuals. And the moment the situation changes, the relationship dissolves because there was never a foundation strong enough to support it without the scaffolding of external circumstances. Here's what research shows about relationship maintenance. According to studies on social connection, people maintain an average of 3 to 5 close relationships throughout their lifetime, with dozens or even hundreds of looser connections that cycle in and out based on life stages and circumstances. Your brain literally doesn't have the capacity to maintain deep, active relationships with everyone you've ever connected with. So we unconsciously categorize people into tiers: essential relationships that we'll fight to maintain, important relationships that we'll nurture when possible, and peripheral relationships that we'll let fade naturally when they no longer serve a functional purpose in our lives. When someone stops calling, they've reclassified your relationship from an essential or important tier down to peripheral. And the brutal honesty you need to accept that you probably did the same thing with dozens of people throughout your own life without even realizing it. But here's the part that actually sets you free. Just because a relationship was situational doesn't mean it was fake or meaningless. Those connections served a purpose in that specific season of your life. They brought joy, support, growth, or companionship when you needed it. The mistake is expecting every meaningful connection to last forever. Some relationships are meant to be lifetime bonds, and others are meant to be beautiful chapters that close when the story moves forward. And trying to force a chapter-based relationship into a lifetime commitment creates suffering for everyone involved. The person who stopped calling isn't betraying you. They're just accepting the natural evolution of your connection while you're still holding on to what used to be. Now we get to the third truth, and this is the one that's actually dangerous if you don't understand it correctly. When someone doesn't call or message you for a long time, the third thing it means is that they've created emotional distance as a protective mechanism, and you need to respect that boundary even if they never explicitly stated it. Human beings are not obligated to explain their withdrawal. They're not required to give you closure, justify their choices, or make you feel better about their decision to pull away. And here's the part that makes people angry. Their silence is actually a form of communication. It's them telling you without words that they need space, that the relationship isn't working for them anymore, or that engaging with you costs more emotional energy than they're willing to spend right now. Carl Jung talked extensively about psychological boundaries and the shadow self, the parts of ourselves and our relationships that we don't want to acknowledge. Sometimes people pull away because you represent something uncomfortable to them. Maybe you remind them of a version of themselves they're trying to move past. Maybe the dynamic between you enabled patterns they're trying to break. Maybe your energy, your needs, or your perspective clashes with the person they're trying to become. And instead of having a potentially hurtful conversation about why the relationship no longer fits, they choose silent withdrawal as the kinder option. They're not ghosting you out of cruelty, they're protecting both of you from a confrontation that would likely cause more pain than resolution. Here's what you need to understand about emotional boundaries and withdrawal. When someone creates distance, pushing against that boundary doesn't bring them closer. It confirms that you don't respect their autonomy, which justifies their decision to pull away even more. Think of it like this. Imagine you're in a room with someone, and you take a step back because you need physical space. If that person immediately steps forward to close the gap, what message does that send? It tells you that your need for space is less important than their need for proximity. It's a violation of your autonomy disguised as affection. The same principle applies to emotional distance. When someone pulls away and you respond by calling more, texting more, showing up unannounced, or demanding explanations, you're essentially telling them that your discomfort with their absence matters more than their need for space. And that's not love or friendship, that's control dressed up as care. Research on attachment theory shows that the people with anxious attachment styles struggle the most with this type of withdrawal because they interpret distance as abandonment and rejection rather than as a neutral shift in relationship dynamics. But here's the growth opportunity hidden in this pain. Someone else's decision to not contact you is actually giving you critical information about where you stand in their life. And ignoring that information keeps you trapped in a fantasy version of the relationship that doesn't exist anymore. The healthiest response to prolonged silence is acceptance. Not bitter resignation, not passive-aggressive martyrdom, but genuine acceptance that this person has made a choice. And you're going to respect that choice while simultaneously releasing your emotional investment in a connection that's no longer mutual. So what do you actually do with this information? How do you move forward when someone who mattered to you stops reaching out? First, you stop creating narratives about what their silence means. Stop telling yourself they're testing you, or they're going through something and they'll come back when they're ready, or they're just bad at communication. Those are stories you're creating to avoid accepting the simple truth that they're not reaching out because they don't want to reach out. Second, you redirect the energy you were spending on analyzing their absence into building relationships with people who actively choose you. The people who make time, who initiate contact, who show up consistently, those are your people. Third, you practice what psychologists call radical acceptance, which means acknowledging reality exactly as it is without trying to change it, fix it, or make it mean something other than what it clearly means. And here's the final piece that ties everything together. When you stop chasing people who've pulled away, when you stop overanalyzing their silence, when you stop waiting for them to suddenly realize your worth and come running back, you create space in your life for something much more valuable: relationships built on mutual choice, consistent effort, and genuine compatibility. You also reclaim your self-respect, which takes a massive hit every time you beg for scraps of attention from someone who's shown you through their actions that you're not a priority. The most powerful thing you can do when someone doesn't call or message you is absolutely nothing. Not as a manipulation tactic to make them miss you, but as a genuine acceptance that you deserve relationships where effort flows both ways. If this hit home for you, if you're sitting there right now thinking about someone who stopped reaching out and you've been driving yourself crazy trying to figure out why, do me a favor, hit that like button, because it tells me you're ready to hear uncomfortable truths instead of comforting lies. And drop a comment telling me how long you waited before you finally accepted that someone wasn't coming back, because I guarantee your story will help someone else who's struggling with the same thing right now. Let's build a community of people who value themselves to walk away from one-sided relationships and invest their energy in connections that actually feed their soul instead of draining it.